Do your players own the 5th edition Monsters Manual? Do they know the 5e monsters as well as you do? Does this make your players hard to challenge or surprise because they know how to counter every attack and every ability the 5th edition monsters have? Well, this is your lucky day, because this video has your solution. Advanced Dungeons & Dragons 2nd Edition has thousands of monsters, many of which have never appeared in any other edition. In this video, you will learn how to take the myriad 2nd Edition monsters your players have never even heard of and convert them into 5th Edition so you can use them in your game. If you haven't seen them already, you may want to watch the first 2 videos in this series. They cover converting 2nd Edition modules and NPCs. Click on the card above or the link in the description below. This video, like that one, will have timestamps to allow you to use it as a resource. That way you don't have to watch 15 or 20 minutes of video to get to the parts you need to convert what you're doing at the time. Before we get down to the brass tacks of converting monsters, I'd like to take a few seconds to tell you about our design studio, Dark House Rules Games. We offer everything from adventures and campaign expansions to maps and monsters. Do you need an NPC or magic item? We've got you covered. Just looking for a character portrait or other game art? Well, look no further. Dark House Rules Games has all your gaming needs in one place. Check us out at our Subscribestar page, updated monthly. See the description below for the link. Okay, now that we have that out of the way, in this video we will cover each part of the 2e monsters sheet and how to convert each of those parts into 5e. There are some parts of the 2nd edition stat block that have no 5e counterpart, and vice versa, but they can still be converted. Now that you know what to expect, let's roll up our sleeves and get down to it. The first line of the 2nd edition monsters stat block is climate/terrain. This isn't a stat so much as a quick reference to help you, as the DM, determine how appropriate the monster you're looking at is for where the encounter you're planning is happening. In 2nd edition, random encounters were rolled on tables like these that were tied to a particular terrain type. If you were going to make your own random encounter tables, you would want to check to make sure the monster on it had the proper climate/terrain. More information about where a type of monster can be found is often given later on in the description, particularly in its Habitat/Society and Ecology section. Climate/terrain has no direct correlation in 5th edition. When converting a 2nd edition monster to 5th edition, just remember where the monster can be found when writing its description and add it in there. The second part of the 2e stat block is frequency. Frequency lets the DM know how likely their party of adventurers are to run into a monster of that type, while in the monster's listed climate/terrain. Frequency is broken into 4 categories, each having a corresponding percentage chance of being encountered. Common at 65%, uncommon 20%, rare 11%, and very rare at 4%. Most DMs don't actually roll to see if their player PCs encounter something. Rather, they use the monster's frequency to give them a general idea of how likely it would be to have an encounter with said monster. The third line in the 2e stat block is occupied by organization. Organization is like climate/terrain, more of a reference than a stat. It tells what kind of group, if any, the monster may be a member of. A monster's organization might be solitary, pack, tribe, brood, swarm, flock, band, or any number of other descriptors. There's usually more information about the type of organization a monster belongs to in its Habitat/Society. Like several of the 2e stats, there is no direct correlation to organization in the 5e stat block. If you wish, you can write out the organization information in the converted monster's description. Next up is another reference, activity cycle. They grouped all the references at the top to make them easier to see at a glance. Activity cycle is pretty simple. 95% of the time it's either day, night, or any. Activity cycle lets you, the DM, know when a monster is likely to be out and about, hunting and the like, or asleep in their lair, if they have one. This, like most of the other references in the 2e stat block, could easily find its way into the converted monster's description. That brings us to line 5 in the 2E stat block, which is diet. Usually this will read something to the effect of one of these 3 answers: carnivore, herbivore, or omnivore. Although it might say nil for creatures that don't need to eat to survive, like golems or many types of undead, there are also monsters that feed off unusual sustenance, such as the Goth beholderkin that feeds on magic, or mephits whose diet reads special. The DM then has to read the description, usually the Ecology, for more details. Like most of the above lines, diet can be worked into the general description if you wish. Line number 6 tells the monster's intelligence. This is the only one of the 6 ability scores that is included in the basic 2E stat block. The other 5 ability scores might be provided if they are important to potential encounters. This information would most likely be found in either the Combat or Habitat and Society paragraphs. Unlike 5th edition, 2nd edition saving throws are not linked directly to ability scores, so in most cases this information is unnecessary. To fill in the missing information, I suggest you look at similar creatures that already exist in 5th edition and use them as a guide. Line number 7 is treasure. This stat will either give a letter/letters, sometimes with a multiplier, or it will say nil or special. When there are letters, this refers to a treasure type on the random treasure generating tables in the revised Dungeon Master's Guide for 2nd edition. These tables can be found between pages 180 and 190 in the Advanced Dungeons & Dragons Revised Dungeon Master's Guide. That brings us to line 8 of the 2E stat block, alignment. Of all the stats in the 2nd edition stat block, this is the only one that can stay just as it is. Alignment has changed little over the decades, although the way people think of it has somewhat. Now on to line number 9, number appearing. The number appearing stat is exactly what it sounds like. It reveals how many of the monster will be involved in a given encounter. This stat is usually given as a range as seen here for the fire salamander and snakes. In this case, to determine how many fire salamanders would be involved in an encounter, the DM would roll 1d4 plus 1, and that would produce a number that is in the 2 to 5 range. Some creatures will have 2 sets of number appearing stats, like dryads. As you can see, the number appearing for dryads says 1 or 1 to 6. An explanation for this is given in the Dryad's Habitat/Society. There you will find that dryads are normally solitary, but in very rare cases you may discover up to 6 of them whose trees are close enough together for them to live as a group. Like most of the other stats we have covered up to this point, number appearing does not have a 5th edition stat it relates to. This is another example of something you can put in the general description paragraph. Armor class is the 9th line of the stat block for 2nd edition. I went into how to convert it from descending to ascending armor class in depth in the 2nd video in this series. You can find that by clicking on the card above or following the link in the description below. Because of that, I will simply give the conversion formula here before I move on to the next stat. To convert descending armor class, which starts at 10 and improves as it drops to -10, to ascending armor class that you as a 5th edition DM are familiar with, all you have to do is this. Look at the 2nd edition armor class given in the monster stat block. I will use this Fire Drake who has an AC of 5 as an example. Take that 5 and subtract it from 10. Then add the answer, 5, back to 10, and that gives you your 5e AC, which in this case is 15. If the monster has a negative armor class, like this Tanara Baylor, you follow the same formula. Just remember, when subtracting negative numbers from positive ones, you add the absolute value of the negative number. So with this example, directly converting the Baylor, a monster that I'm pretty sure already exists in 5e, it would have a 5e armor class of 28. 10 minus -8, which is the same as 10 plus 8, that equals 18, plus 10 equals 28. Alright, now that we have armor class behind us, let's move on to movement. Movement is the 2e equivalent of speed in 5th edition. With two exceptions, it works the same in both editions. The first difference is that the distance represented by the number is not the same. For a full explanation of this, you can watch the first video in this series, link in the description below, or on the card here. To convert 2nd edition movement to 5th edition speed, just multiply movement by 2.5 to get speed. The second thing that isn't the same is how flight works in 2nd edition. All creatures with flying movement rates should have the maneuverability class of flyer they are, in parentheses right next to the flight movement rate. Here I'll use the Ecology as an example. It has a flying movement rate of 36c. Doing the conversion to 5e speed, that means that when flying, its speed is 90 feet. And the C means it's an average flyer, as far as how maneuverable it is. The flying maneuverability classes run from A, the best, to E, the worst. Here's what each class says about the maneuverability of the flying creatures that fall within them. Class A. Flyers of this class are absolute masters of flight. They can hover, face any direction in a given round, and attack each round. Class B flyers are quite adept in the air. They can hover, turn up to 180 degrees in a round, and attack each round. Class C flyers are adequate flyers. To stay airborne, they must move no less than half their flying movement rate. They can turn up to 90 degrees in a round, and can attack every other round. Class D flyers are somewhat clumsy in the air. Like Class C flyers, they must maintain at least half their movement rate to remain airborne, and they can only turn 60 degrees in a round. They can only make an attack run on an enemy every third round. Finally, Class E flyers have 4 flight skills. They must fly at least half their flight movement rate to remain airborne, just like Classes C and D. They can only turn 30 degrees in a round, and are limited to 1 attack pass every 6 rounds. That brings us to hit dice. In 5th edition, hit dice are used somewhat differently than they were in 2nd edition. In 2nd edition, hit dice are almost synonymous with level. They give the Dungeon Master a general idea of the power level of the creature. Almost all 2e monsters use a d8 as their hit die, with a few exceptions like Death Knights who use a d10, or some undead that state in their description that their hit points are as in life, in which case they're usually based on whatever class the undead creature was before it died. Also, some 2nd edition monsters have modifiers added onto whatever the result of their hit die roll was. An example of this can be found in the very first monster in the Monsters Manual, the Ecology. As you can see under hit dice, the listing says 1 plus 2. This means that they have between 3 and 10 hit points. 1 times 1d8 plus 2. If you use the average instead of rolling, it would come out to 7. In most cases, a monster's constitution is already figured into their hit dice. There are exceptions to this as well, especially with monsters that may have different ranks or even character class levels. So now that you know how to handle hit dice, let's move on to the one that everyone seems to be afraid of, Thaco. Just like with armor class before it, I give a detailed description of how Thaco can be converted in my last video in this series. If you'd like to see that, you can click on the card above or the link in the description below. Because of that, I'm just going to give you the formula and an example or two here. A monster's Thaco is usually related to its hit dice, but not always. In other words, more powerful, aka higher hit dice, monsters usually have lower, aka better, Thacos. Thaco corresponds to the attack bonus on a 5e stat block, shown here. When we look at a direct comparison of the same monster, the Thri-kreen, in 2nd edition, its Thaco does not convert properly. That's because Thri-kreen, like many other monsters, have undergone large changes over the decades. Backwards converting a 5e Thri-kreen would give it a 17 Thaco, and as you can see, the 2e Thri-kreen has a 13 Thaco. Now if you're trying to convert a 2E monster that does not exist yet in 5E, here's how you would do that. Take the THAC0 from the monster's stat block and subtract it from 20. The resulting number becomes the 5th edition version of the monster's attack bonus. Here's an example. If we look at the 2nd edition Titan, you can see that its THAC0 is 5. Plugging that into the formula, 20 minus 5 equals 15. So converting a 2E Titan to 5E, it would have a plus 15 bonus to all its physical attack rolls. It's pretty simple. The next two stats in the block go together. They are number of attacks and damage/attack. The number of attacks is usually pretty simple, like with the Titan, it's 2 per round, in this case with its fists. That is explained in the combat paragraph though. Then you go down to damage per attack, and that reveals how much damage the attacks do. In the case of the Titan, each of its 2 punches do 7d6 hit points of damage. Some monsters have multiple kinds of attacks that they might use in different combinations. The Thri-kreen we were looking at earlier is a good example of this. When not using a weapon, it can attack 5 times a round. Once with each of its 4 claws for 1d4 points of damage per hit, and once with its bite for 1d4 plus 1 hit points of damage. If it desires to use a weapon, it only gets 2 attacks a round, 1 with the weapon and 1 with its bite. These limitations do not necessarily affect player character Thri-kreen though. Because the default number of attacks for 5E monsters is 1 attack per round, and most 2E monsters get a 3 attack claw-bite routine every round, you may want to consider, especially with low-level monsters, nerfing their number of attacks per round. You can look at similar monsters that already exist in 5E for guidance. Alright, that brings us to the 16th line of the 2nd edition monster stat block, Special Attack. This refers to any special attack forms or a little bit extra that a monster might add on to one of their normal attacks to make them more effective in combat. Look at the Thri-kreen again. It has paralyzation listed as its special attack. To find out how that works, we have to look at the combat section below the stat block. There, among other things, we see that paralyzation attack happens when a Thri-kreen bites an opponent and injects it with poison. Special attacks can be all manner of things, from the Tarrasque's sharpness bite that can sever limbs, to the Kyr's psionic attacks. I'll touch on psionics a little later in the video. Some creatures have no special attack form, in which case the line will read nil. Some have so many, or one that can't be referred to with just a few words. If this is the case, their special attack line will say "see below." The details will be in the combat section of the monster's write-up. When converting a 2E monster's special attack, depending on what they are, it might fall under the special traits or actions portion of the stat block. Next up is the 17th line in the 2E stat block, Special Defense. Special Defense works in much the same way as Special Attack when it comes to how it is annotated, elaborated on, and converted to 5th edition. Some examples of Special Defense are the Jackalwares being hit only by iron or +1 or better magical weapons, the Invisible Stalker's invisibility, or the Juggernaut Stolen Golem's immunity to fire. That brings us to another stat that does not have a direct 5E counterpart, magic resistance. Magic resistance will be shown as a percentage chance, as you can see here with the Banshee. Its magic resistance is 50%. Although there are some complex rules involving how magic resistance works in 2nd edition, if you want to use a simple rule of thumb, you can say magic resistance applies to all spells, not psionic powers, that directly target the monster. So something like Disintegrate would have to check against the monster's magic resistance to see if it affected the monster or not. But Stinking Cloud would be undeterred by the monster's magic resistance. In 2nd edition, when a spell that is eligible to be resisted is cast at something with magic resistance, Then the DM rolls a D100 or percentile die. If the roll is less than or equal to the monster's magic resistance score, then the spell fizzles and has no effect. To reflect a monster's 2e magic resistance in 5e, you may have to be a bit crafty. Just dropping the magic resistance altogether isn't a good option. Many 2e monsters with magic resistance rely upon it as a core part of what makes them a challenging opponent in combat. What I did when I converted the Loup-Garou, which has a 20% magic resistance to 5th edition for Ravenloft Prey of the Black Wolf, was I made up a new stat to add to the 5th edition block. I called it what it was, magic resistance. To keep the statistical advantage the same while using mechanics more familiar than percentage rolls to 5th edition DMs, I changed it to a bonus to any save versus spell directed at the Loup-Garou. A +1 bonus for every 5% of magic resistance. If you would like to see more direct conversion of monsters, Ravenloft Prey of the Black Wolf has both 2nd edition and 5th edition versions of 4 monsters in it. You can find a link to it in the video description below. The 19th line in the 2nd edition stat block is size. There's not much change here, as you can see with this side-by-side comparison of the size category tables. They are very similar. You should be able to just port the 2e size over when converting over to 5e, with very few exceptions. Line 20 of the 2e stat block covers morale. This will usually include a descriptor such as steady or elite, along with a number. When the DM feels that a monster may be having thoughts of living to fight another day, they can roll a d20. If the number is less than or equal to the monster's morale rating, then it stays in the fight. If not, it turns tail and runs. Once again, there is no direct correlate to morale in 5th edition. Because of this, you may want to write conditions that will make monsters run from a fight into the general description. Examples of this could be when outnumbered, if 2/3 of its allies are dead, or if it has 15 hit points or less. The final line in the standard 2e stat block is experience. Many factors go into determining a monster's experience. Everything from its hit dice to the damage potential to its magic resistance and special defenses. For more information on working up a monster's experience, there is a great table/worksheet in the How to Use This Book section of the 2nd Monsters Manual Annual Edition. It is what I use when creating new monsters for 2nd edition. Looking at both 2nd and 5th edition monsters, it seems that 2nd edition gave out just a little more experience for the same monsters. This is hardly surprising considering many 2nd edition classes required over 10 times the experience to make it to 20th level as their 5th edition counterparts. To bring 2nd edition experience in line with 5th edition standards, knock off about 25% of the 2e experience points. Okay, we made it out of the stat block. So that brings us to the Psionic Summary. Most monsters don't have a Psionic Summary. Only monsters that have some psionic ability will have one included in their sheet. Where you will find the most monsters with Psionic Summaries is if you are converting monsters from the Dark Sun setting. Psionics are very common there. As you can see with the Aboleth here, the Psionic Summary is broken up into 6 parts. Let's quickly go over them now. The first column is level. This is the approximate power level of the psionic monster, and it corresponds to all things that would be checked against a psionicist's player character's class level. The next column shows the number of disciplines, aka large groups of powers, kind of like schools of magic, sciences, or strong powers, and devotions, or weak powers, the monster has. As you can see, the Aboleth has access to a total of 21 powers from 3 different disciplines. The middle column tells what attack and defense modes the monster has. Attack and defense modes are used in telepathic combat. Their abbreviations are given in the Psionic Summary to save space. Note, defense modes are automatically gained periodically as a psionicist levels up. They do not count towards the total number of psionic powers a psionicist can have. The next column is power score. Unlike player character psionicists or wild talents, using psionics with monsters has had to be simplified. As I said earlier, most monsters only have their intelligence given, so psionic powers that call for a power score based on their wisdom or constitution might be hard to figure. Because of this, power score will usually have a number given to use, or it will look like it does here. To succeed on a power score roll, the DM would have to roll less than or equal to the power score. The last column in the Psionic Summary is PSPs. PSP stands for Psionic Strength Points. Each psionic power has a certain number necessary to activate it and to maintain it, if it can be maintained. Once a psionic user is out of PSPs, they have to rest to regain more before they can use any of their powers. Finally, the Psionic Summary has a short list of powers that the monster definitely has. Here, only 3 powers from one discipline are shown. When the attack modes are taken into account, defense modes don't count against the total number of powers, remember. This leaves 15 powers the DM can add to make each aboleth unique. Okay, so how do you convert 2E psionics to 5E? Up until a couple of years ago, I would have had to have said ported over whole cloth, but a better alternative has been released since then. If you want to use Psionics for 5th edition, you should get a copy of A Classic Psionic System for 5e by Friedrich Leclerc. It does a good job of preserving the real psionic feel of old school psionics while using mechanics 5e DMs and players are familiar with. Unlike the Mystic and other attempts at psionic characters put out by Wizards of the Coast, the psionicist presented in A Classic Psionic System for 5e doesn't just feel like another kind of arcane caster. Along with the class, this product also converts some of the old 2e psionic powers. This book is a must-have for anyone who wants to use psionics in their 5th edition game. I may do a review video of it in the near future. The remainder of the 2E Monsters sheet consists of 4 parts, all being a few paragraphs of text each. The more powerful the monster, usually the longer the text portions are. Some take up as much as 2 full pages, while other simpler monsters are laid out in just the lower half of the first page. Immediately below either the monster's experience point value or Psionic Summary, if it has one, is the monster's general description. This is usually a couple of paragraphs long and contains information on distinguishing features of the monster, such as what it looks like, what it smells like, and what it sounds like, and how the monster communicates if it does at all. If there is any information that does not fit well anywhere else, it usually finds its way into the monster's general description. After general description, the next part is the combat section. In this section, all the monster's offensive and defensive capabilities are detailed. If something in the stat block said see below, it's most likely to be found here. The combat section of a monster sheet also reveals the tactics a monster will use in battle. If a monster has what would be called legendary or layer actions in 5th edition, it would be found in the combat section of a 2E monster sheet. Having said that, they will not be labeled as such. Legendary and layer actions are 5th edition concepts. You will have to suss out which of the monster's special attacks or defenses would qualify as legendary or layer actions using your own judgment while converting a monster. Following the combat section is the Habitat/Society section. This part of the monster sheet gives information on how it interacts with those around it. If it is a social creature like a goblin, this section will talk about the creature's hierarchy and lifestyle. It is here that variance in stats of the different ranked creatures of the same type may be presented. A captain may have better weapons, armor, and hit dice than the standard guard, but not as good as the chieftain. Sometimes cultural aspects of a monster are detailed in the Habitat/Society section. It might discuss art, architecture, or the overall attitudes of the monster's society. For a normally solitary creature, the Habitat/Society section might have information on the creature's home range and how they select and defend it, as well as information on the monster's breeding habits. The last part of the monster sheet for 2nd edition monsters is the Ecology section. In this part, what impact the monster has on its surroundings are revealed. What is the monster's prey and what preys upon it? The Ecology section also discusses any useful parts a monster may have. Will its teeth make good daggers? Can its hide be turned into armor? Will its blood be useful as ink to pen magic scrolls? All this type of information can be found in the Ecology section. None of the written out sections of the 2e monsters sheet convert directly to 5e. Instead, they may be mined for information to plug into a 5e monster stat block. This may take a little practice, but before you know it, you will start to recognize certain keywords that will point you to the 5e stat they can fill. Well, that's about all you should need to know to convert the enormous number of 2nd edition monsters over to 5th edition for use in your game. If there's something you still have questions about, please ask about it in the comments. I'll be happy to clear up any confusion you still have about converting, not just monsters, but any 2e things to 5e. If you would like me to continue this series, just let me know in the comments. Any topic ideas would be greatly appreciated. Before you go, please don't forget to like this video and share it with a friend, or even better, on Facebook. If you haven't already, go ahead and subscribe to this channel so you don't miss out on my future videos. If you want to help me make this channel better and get access to a bunch of gaming accessories, you can jump over to my Subscribe Star page and pledge your support there. The link is in the description below. Your support will allow me to invest in better equipment and software so I can bring you better products. Thank you for watching this video all the way through. I hope you found everything you need to enrich your game by using 2nd edition products. Until my next video, goodbye.